October 27th. We are starting a little late. We're in an exec session with legal counsel from 5 to 5:24. And then in exec session from 5:26 until about 6:18 on collective bargaining. So that got us in here a few minutes late, so I apologize. So we will now stand for the pledge, please. All right, we get to start with some student input. I don't know if you all have decided who'd like to go first, if maybe we would have Sophia and Tarang on EL9. I think are those two here? One. Okay, is Sophia here? Okay, then let's have Sophia start and we'll have you up at this microphone. And you can, reintroduce yourself. So say your name so everybody will know who you are. And then you can give your input on EL9, our annual report to the public.
Okay. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So my name is Sophia Kovalenko. I go to Liberty High School and I'm a senior there. And I had EL number 9, which is that the superintendent shall not fail to prepare and publish on behalf of the board an annual progress report to the public that includes student performance, information about school district strategies and revenues and expenditures and whatnot. So a lot of the students that I interviewed didn't have very much to say about the EL because first of all, nobody really looks at the records, like the student wise. They don't really check up on the public annual report because it's just not interesting to them. And also they don't know about it. But I decided that I need to talk to parents and teachers more about it because I thought that they would know a little bit more. And one of the parents that I talked to said that they believe this EL is very important because entrusting your child to school is a very personal thing. And they need to have the sense that the school board openly communicates to the parents everything that goes on with their child, everything that the child is subjected to, and everything about the school environment. And most of the parents, 70% of the parents that I interviewed said that they don't actually look at the public report, but they still believe that it's important that it exists and that this information is easily accessible and available for everyone. Another parent said something I thought was very important. They said that if the school district doesn't make this public, sorry, let me find it. Oh, it's the school's job to bring up students as future citizens that are going to be actively engaged in their government and in society, and having records and reports available to them just so that they know that they have the right to see what is going on with them is very important, so that if they don't like something, they have the ability to bring it up and talk about it. That's really all I got.
Great. Well, thank you for coming and sharing that input. All right. So next up, let's do EL13 facilities. And I think that's Nathan and Paige. If either one are here. Okay.
Hello. We're good? Okay. My name is Nate Scher, a senior and one of the student reps for Skyline High School. So for the past 3 weeks, I've been randomly asking my peers and some teachers about the major topics mentioned in EL13 and the last monitoring report, encompassing their concerns about safety or sanitation, the environment, proper compliance with policies, any changes they want to be addressed, and questions they've had. In terms of safety or sanitation, some of my peers have mentioned ceiling panels on the bottom floor missing or damaged due to what seems like a leak of some sort. There were no negative reports for the bathroom safety or sanitation. However, some of the bathrooms are periodically closed. So with the new bathroom policy where students are required to carry a color-coded lanyard designated to a region of the school, students are worried about getting in trouble for going outside their designated region to use the restroom. There were more complaints about the bathroom policy, but I'll mention those in EL 16 equity, which I'm presenting on later. Facilities are properly administrated. Some examples are that the school clubs need facility request forms and advisors are needed at all times after school hours. The school's doors are always locked during class time, so badges are needed to enter. And the parking lot rules seem to be properly enforced. Student athletes in particular have been complaining about no water refilling stations. So when they need to refill the water bottle, they sometimes use the non-potable water sinks or need to walk to the athletic training room. Puget Sound Water Alliance has donated $2,000 to implement water refilling stations, but students and I agree that more than 6 are needed. Lastly, I've heard quite a bit of support for solar at Skyline, so here's a summary of that. There's a crowdfunding going on facilitated by a local organization. Multiple quotes have been given through various solar installers. Multiple organizations have offered to assist in grant writing. The 2 major incentives are the financial case and educational case, and one of my peers sent me the quotes, so I can email you guys the summary afterwards with the quotes hyperlinked. And then with a 100 kilowatt DC system, the ROI in 25 years is about $57,566, and the payback period is 20.8 years. PSC and Sphere Solar have both agreed to make educational content out of this installation. And then the last section I have are some questions they listed. So there seems to be some confusion about the resource conservation manager. So they're wondering if there's going to be a new one. And then would it be okay for a group of students to access and learn about Skyline's building plans? And then lastly, when is composting going to be reinstated?
Okay. I don't know. Thank you very much for that input. All right. And you are?
Paige.
You're Paige. Okay, excellent.
So I'm Paige. I'm the student representative from Issaquah High School, and I'm a current senior. EL 13, as Nate mentioned, focuses on the Issaquah School District's management of its facilities, which includes schools and parking lots and fields and those kinds of things. The superintendent and the Issaquah School Board are expected to keep all facilities clean and safe. And since our returning to in-person learning, it's become especially important. I had my own opinions about this topic, but to gain a better understanding of the student body's opinions, I conducted a poll for Issaquah High School students. And the main question in this poll was, do you feel that the district has done a good job of maintaining our school's facilities? And so we got about 150 Issaquah High School students to answer this poll. It was a simple yes or no question, but I did follow up on some randomized people. I chose random people and asked them exactly what they answered, because the data showed that an estimated 79% of students polled felt that the district had not done a good job of maintaining our facilities, which obviously is cause for concern. So as I decided to interview more people, there were several main issues that raised concern among students, and the first was sanitation. So many students agreed that facilities such as classrooms, bathrooms, and common areas were not being adequately maintained. And the main reason for this was just there's a lot of reports of trash and paper towels and stuff on the floors, which they believe is a hazard because they could trip and fall and slip on those things. Many students, however, acknowledge that our school does not have enough janitorial staff to clean up after the students. And especially after the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of students have been worse with cleaning up after themselves. So a lot of people did acknowledge that. Some solutions recommended by the student population was to hire more janitors or increase pay to try and incentivize that. As I continued interviewing students, I found that many viewed the school's bathroom policy as a concern as well. And I heard that Nate is going to talk about it a little bit later, but Issaquah High Schools might be different, so I'm just going to touch on it briefly. So at the beginning of the year, the district implemented a new policy preventing students from going to the bathroom during the first and last 10 minutes of class, as well as requiring them to get a signed pass and then wear a pass around their neck. And EL 13 states the superintendent cannot unreasonably deny the public's use of facilities as long as student safety, functions, and any instructional program are not compromised. And while the district's justification for the decision of using bathroom passes is valid. Many students believe that the rule has compromised student safety just because people who suffer from medical conditions or really need to leave to use the bathroom have struggled to leave as a result of this rule. So after all the input I collected, in general, students agree that school facilities are pretty well maintained in light of the certain situation that we're in right now. And they acknowledge that they're also responsible for picking up after themselves, which is something that I think we all need to work on a little bit more. But in general, it's the responsibility of the students and the staff to make sure that Issaquah High School is a suitable environment for learning.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad the kids also realize that they are a part of the solution of taking care of their building. So good. I'm glad to hear that. All right. Then we have EL 16, and I think we have Mia and Nathan again. So if you guys would like to go.
Hello, I am Mia Williamson, and I'm a student representative from Liberty High School, where I am a current junior, and I'm giving student input on EL 16 equity. Just as a general statement, I think that students feel that the district is equitable overall, but that many improvements can be made. We feel that the district does acknowledge its diversity, and we see that in different months celebrating diversity. However, this is not enough. Students feel that these efforts are mediocre, as we may acknowledge the month but never truly learn about it. The same goes for systemic and institutional inequities. We acknowledge them, but we're never truly educated about them. Many students express the desire to have more resources on these subjects available to them via the district. We want more opportunities to learn about our and others' culture, but we don't feel like the district encourages enough to do so. Even our curriculum needs improvement. There are times when it's clear the district is focusing on diverse viewpoints, but many students think this feels forced. We hope for a more natural integration of these viewpoints in the future. Academically, students do feel that teachers do a good job of equitably providing everyone with the help they need to succeed in the class. We like flex time and before and after school office hours because they give teachers a chance to focus on the students who may need more support. Still, a few students pointed out that students with less visible mental illnesses or learning disabilities often do not get the treatment owed to them, as teachers may not recognize those disabilities, or they forget to check for 504s or IEPs, which is definitely an issue that needs to be addressed. In terms of social and emotional well-being, students feel that the support provided by the district is equitable between all groups of students. However, students have issues with the actual support provided. I'm not sure if this is the best EL to address these because this is more about equity, but I will still share the words of one student that I thought were impactful. Quote, "I think there are individuals within the district that acknowledge the deeper problems, but it feels that the district as a whole is trying to meet certain requirements or quotas. SEL as a means of acknowledging/educating students feels very out of touch and poorly done, and feels like the district is trying to check a box rather than acting thoughtfully. Of course, there is a difference between recognizing and acknowledging the issue and acting on the issue, which the district can do a better job of," unquote. Overall, while students believe that the district is equitable for all groups of students, we want to see more effort put in by the district to celebrate diversity and remove societal barriers and inequities, as well as improve social and emotional support.
Great. Thank you for that feedback. Appreciate that. All right. And Nathan.
My name is Nate Scher, again, a senior and one of the student reps at Skyline High School. And for the past 3 weeks, I've been randomly asking my peers and some teachers about the major topics mentioned in EL 16 and the last monitoring report, encompassing aspects like the appropriate resources, ease of access to said resources, and any questions or concerns. Overall, there wasn't too much said by whom I'd asked, but here we go. So the bathroom policy seems to be the prominent complaint. There are numerous students with health conditions that have complained about needing to wait to use the restroom due to only one person being allowed to go at one time. The alleged cause being that some students go to the restroom to pass class time. This, for obvious reasons, leaves those with particular urinary or bowel health conditions at a noticeable disadvantage, because instead of focusing on the class or the schoolwork, they are now worried about when they'll be able to use the restroom. Running Start students are complaining about not being informed about what happens during SEL lessons. Some of the content covered during SEL lessons is required for graduation, for instance, Zello, and this group is falling behind on those requirements. On the topic of SEL lessons, there are various helpful resources given in the SEL presentations during flex time. However, because they are in the presentation, none of the students have access to the resources. Going over the collection, analysis, and utilization of data, everyone seems to agree that this evidence-based approach is valuable, particularly for long-term trends. And then when I looked at the ISD website, all the necessary resources that I can think of were intuitively placed. And I like the consistent UI between Skyline and ISD's website. This is about everything I collected. So in summary, I think that the equity at Skyline High School, from what I've heard and collected, with the limitations / biases from my data collection process in mind, is following these guidelines listed.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. And I appreciate all the student input because our superintendent and staff will, take all of that into consideration as we look at putting those monitoring reports together for this year. Great. Thank you guys. All right. Got through that. And now it is time for public comment. This is an opportunity for public comment on issues not scheduled for public comment on the meeting agenda. Items that are scheduled for public comment tonight include monitoring report EL3 personnel administration, monitoring report EL8 communications and support, and school calendars. We're having a discussion about the survey results, and I will take public comment on that because ultimately the board will be deciding on school calendars at a later time. All right, so all other public comment should be given now. When you go to the podium, please clearly state your name and school attendance area. Limit your comments to 2 minutes. We'll be using a timer to help you with that. The board neither endorses nor censors any opinions expressed in public comment. Please keep comments civil and respectful. No comments or applause from the audience, but feel free to wave hands to show support of the speaker. So I'll go through the people that are signed up here on the list, and then I'll also ask if there's anybody on Zoom. All right, so first up here is Larry White.
Hello, Larry White. My boys went to Issaquah High School. And last meeting, Director Mullins brought up some interesting points regarding the district students of color. And I thought it was interesting enough to kind of bring up, and I shared an email with her on my experiences. She can share that if she chooses. However, the basis of my message was essentially realizing that students of color carry some unique challenges, especially in a community like Issaquah. The fact of the matter is, it's a predominantly white community, and so the minority group, it's kind of very difficult to understand what minorities are needing it and such. So, but what I can say as a Black man is, I encourage the district to please, in providing equity, please do not lower the barrier for our Black and brown students, because you're doing them a disservice by not holding to the same standards as other students. I feel if you engage in a policy that's promoting kind of a soft bigotry of low expectations, you're diminishing the opportunities they have for future success. They need to experience the consequences of their actions and accountability just as much as every other student in the district.
Thank you very much for your input. Next up is Freya Thorson.
Good evening. I'm Freya Thorson. I'm in the Cougar Ridge catchment area. I am co-vice president of the new Issaquah Special Education PTSA, and I'm one of the founders of the Issaquah Dyslexia Partners, a community group here in town. Tonight, I'm wearing just my dyslexia hat, and I have 4 things I want to cover. First, on behalf of the entire dyslexia community, I'd like to welcome our new superintendent. We are all so excited that you're here. We were rooting for you to be hired. Thank you for bringing your amazing energy to this district, and I can't wait to partner with you in the coming years. Second, I'd like to thank the district and some specific individuals for working to improve supports for students with dyslexia in Issaquah. Specifically, I'd like to thank the Issaquah Schools Foundation, Dr. Dana Bailey and Rich Mellish, and the amazing assistive technology team, Maddie McCallan and Amanda Weinberg, for bringing Learning Ally to our district. If we could clone Maddie and Amanda, the world would be a better place. Thank you also to the Issaquah Schools Foundation, OSPI, and this district for funding the Orton Gillingham training that occurred in the last 2 school years. I'd personally like to thank every single teacher, administrator, SLP, and school psych who signed up for this amazing professional development opportunity. It was a big task during some hard times, and our whole community is so grateful for that program. I'd also like to thank Teaching and Learning Department for bringing 3 new instructional programs to our elementary schools. Heggerty, really great reading, and Words Their Way are amazing programs. They're still new, but they have potential to make a big difference for our children, and we're really grateful. Third, I'd like to just highlight that it is October, which is Dyslexia Awareness Month. We know that 1 in 5 students in our district have some form of dyslexia, which means that there are enough students with dyslexia in the Issaquah School District to fill an entire high school. I'll wrap up. But I've left you all with a flyer. My only ask tonight is that you listen to the podcast by Emily Hanford. She's a public radio journalist who's won a lot of awards for her reporting on literacy. She has a couple new podcast episodes out. That's my only ask. It's great driving listening. So thank
Okay,
you.
thank you very much for your input. Next up is Sarah Brown.
I'm going to read so I stay on track here. My name is Sarah Brown, and I am from the Newcastle Elementary School area. And good evening. I'm speaking to you not only tonight as a board member of the Issaquah Special Education PTSA and literacy advocate, but as a child of a deaf adult, identified dyslexic, dysgraphic, ADHD adult, and a mother of children with similar profile. I would like to speak to you tonight about dysgraphia, specific learning disability in writing. Dysgraphia is a tricky little beast and is often comorbid in its presentation. It prefers to be with friends, often dyslexia and ADHD, but can also pop up alone. It can be overlooked or dismissed as unorganized writing or sloppy handwriting, but it is more. It could be challenges with spelling. It could be forgetting important words and sentences. It could be pausing to remember how to write a letter. It could be not having great fine motor skills, so holding a pencil is difficult, and typing really isn't even easier. It could be unable to monitor spacing between letters or words. It could be out of order words and sentences. Students are not naturally writers, just like they are not naturally readers. They need to be taught explicitly. Currently, Issaquah School District utilizes Lucy Calkins units of study. This methodology is based on the assumption that writing skills can and should be taught separately from subjects like history or science. ISD students are not currently writing integrated content. For example, the 4th grade studies the Lewis and Clark exploration, which is fascinating, but they're not writing about it. They're writing persuasive narrative and information units on random topics. Why not hone their skills on Lewis and Clark? The second, even more flawed assumption underlying the Calkins unit of study approach is the concept of writers' workshops that are effective for children as young as 5 years old. More writing is not better writing. Drafts and revising without a solid foundations leaves students lost. Incoherent, barely eligible prose is not constructive use of time, nor does it yield better writers. I'd like us to continue balanced literacy and move on to explicit structured literacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your input. Next up is Grayson Brown, if I said that right. And then after that will be Sandy Stoller.
Hello, Issaquah School Board. My name is Grayson Brown. I am 12 years old and currently enrolled in 7th grade at a private school. I am dyslexic, dysgraphic, and have ADHD. I am also a voracious reader, runner, and explorer. I attended Newcastle Elementary School for 2nd and 3rd grade. I never found the perfect book that made reading magically easier for me. I was never given instructions on handwriting or taught how to spell. I never had an opportunity to balance my strengths with my struggles. The other way around. I had a 504 plan, then an IEP with pull-out help like tutoring. I couldn't make it work for me. They couldn't make it work for me either. I couldn't learn in a place that couldn't teach me how to learn. I couldn't try harder. So we left. What about all the kids who are still there? And I wasn't the only student that had struggled to write. I wasn't the only student who had struggled to read. What about them? Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your input. All right, Sandy Stoller. I see the hands.
Hi, Sandy Stoller, Sunset Elementary area, but my kids are at Issaquah Middle School now. A couple years ago, many of you saw the Issaquah group, parents group come up here. And first I want to thank you, as Freya did, for so much progress that's been made. As my daughter started middle school this year, I was very concerned about her IEP, the transition from having pull out to just a whole different format and moving from class to class. And I just want to read for you really quickly as I checked in with one of her teachers about how her IEP was being implemented and just if there was any concerns. I was just completely impressed to hear about how this teacher already gives my daughter fill in the blank notes rather than writing all the notes herself. How she utilizes a program called Actively Learn through Canvas. It's a program that she shows all students how to use, and that my daughter can have the science curriculum read to her. She can look up what words mean, and there's even a dyslexia setting, which she's watched my daughter use. I didn't know this existed, and it's helping her so much. And I was so impressed that this was proactively done. The next teacher I reached out to already knew about her IEP, had even gone back and asked one of her teachers from her elementary school a couple of questions about how to better help her. And as a parent, it just made me realize everything that this district has done to recognize the needs of dyslexia and work to really put new systems in place. But we know our work is not done. I found an interesting stat through the National Council of Disabilities. 85% of young people in juvenile detention facilities nationwide have a learning disability. 85%. As we talk a lot about social emotional health, behavioral problems post-COVID, those students, those 85% that are in and are going to juvenile detention, they call it the school to prison pipeline.
Yeah.
And so these problems are connected. These emotional, mental health, behavioral challenges are connected to the learning disabilities, the gaps, the pain that causes that.
Thank you.
student.
Thank you very much for your input. Next up is Sarah Porter.
Good evening. My name is Sarah Porter. We've lived in Issaquah for 12 years. I have a 4th grader at Sunset and I have a 7th grader at IMS. So the meetings have been very interesting for the last few weeks. What I bring up is that my 7th grader is dyslexic. And what I would like to emphasize is that we need, whereas we have good accommodations, we need more training and we need more teacher education. So our teachers have been taught how to help our students, but we need them to teach our students. 1st and 2nd grade, my dyslexic son struggled, but we weren't really indicated that it was an academic problem. So when we started to research ADHD, it was an outside expert that said he was a classic dyslexic. So we pulled him out of school because we weren't being taught how to read, got him acclimated, and now we have an IEP and are functioning. I'm with Sandy. The accommodations are great, but we still need to teach them. So I've had some difficult conversations with some staff at IMS, just working through teaching, not accommodating. So he still needs, we can't give up on a 7th grader, right? We still need to teach him how to spell. And I will also say that things like Words Their Way and the spelling programs, my 4th grader is flourishing with it. I just, what's hard for me is what would have happened with my older son had those been available then. So let's not forget about these older kids. We've put the things in place, but remember that we have a whole population of students that have missed. So let's go back and make sure that they are being supported in the same way.
Great. Thank you very much for your input. Shannon Mayo.
Hi.
But I know I should go to this, but I don't want to lose my favorite teacher. You can see people talking, looking at what we left here. So they've grown to help them. I forgot what is in the about the discovering. And behind me, I got this explain the frustration, anger, and fear. Because the ability to write from all of it, not just reading and writing, working, and I can see in my sport, all of it, full problem, fine. May surprise you, or let me know that no one who is support from the training in the instructional methods specifically heard that this was left yet or not just an ed teacher, but most often not just special ed teachers. They are not receiving the support of outlining in Washington's dyslexia intervention for today. I had to actually insist during about the evidence-based curriculum during the students' allowed instruction versus the 50th approach.
Oh, sorry. Could you guys hear anything I was saying?
Yes, we did. So I didn't realize.
Okay. We've been lucky in that favorite teacher that my son did reference during that nightly meltdown, that's his special ed teacher. So while she doesn't have the specific training he needs, she did research on her own and has made some progress with my son. We have received kindness and open ears at Endeavor, managing our IEP, but the issue I want to identify is that it's currently not mandatory for our teachers to be trained in the evidence-based multisensory structured literacy interventions that our state mandates. But even further, we aren't finding ways to ensure incredible teachers like my son's special ed teacher have access to the training during work hours and are compensated for their time.
Thank you for
Thank
your
you.
input. All right, and next up is Amy Dunn. And then if there is anybody on Zoom, to have them raise their hand. Nope, okay.
Has to go last because I have something different to talk about. Good evening. My name is Amy Dunn, and I am a parent of students at Maywood and Maple Hills. According to the CDC, 1 in 44 people in the United States is autistic. Those are just the ones with a diagnosis. That means that in Issaquah School District, sorry, this is why I have to practice, about 450 of them are autistic. Again, just the ones who are identified. There's currently a line 2 years long at both. Gosh, I'm mainly just anxious. There's a line 2 years long at both UW and Seattle Children's for autism evaluation. Autistic people have a range of abilities with a variety of needs. Not all autistic people need specially designed instruction. I have an autistic child, sorry, who does not qualify for an IEP. So he sits in the general ed classroom and misbehaves. Teachers emailed me for help with the behavior. But what can I do about his classroom behavior from my home? I have the privilege of being on the board of the new special education PTSA and was granted access to the special education department on a tour. I learned that there are actually autism specialists employed in this district. It's my understanding that the autism specialists on staff are only available to students with an IEP. How can we broaden access to the specialists to ensure all children impacted by autism can access a good education in this district? Parents are not experts and teachers are not behavioral experts. I humbly request that the autism specialists are made available to the teachers and students across the district, whether or not the student has an IEP.
Great. Thank you very much for your input. All right, that takes care of it because there was nobody on Zoom. So we are done with public input at this point, or public comments at this point. All right, we are on to our consent agenda.
I move the consent agenda be approved as presented.
Second.
All right. All those in favor of approval of the consent agenda, say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, the consent agenda passes. Is there any changes to the regular agenda? Okay, then we are good to move on. And we are on to a report out on the Director Area 2 fall meeting. This was just last night and all members of the board were able to be there. It was run by our Region 2, and this is our WASDA, which is our Washington State School Director Associations. And District Area 2 is kind of the greater King, is it all of King County? Okay, all of King County. And so we were able to meet with our fellow school directors from that area. Our own Director Gallinger is one of the WASDA board members, as well as Christine Chu from the Bellevue School District. And so they brought us together and we had a good conversation, which I'll let anybody else talk about different parts. What I thought was really great was the opportunity to just chat with other board members and just hear what's going on in different places. And the other thing was we were at the Puget Sound Skills Center, which was a fabulous facility where they gave us a tour and we were able to see where they do a nurse CNA, so a certified nurse assistant training, I think is what they are, and they're biomedical and they're dental. And then we had the pleasure of having their culinary students serve us dinner, and they did an excellent job. So it was a great retreat just to be able to connect with people. And so anybody else would like to give some input? Anybody?
Well, I thought it, excuse me, it was kind of a different meeting than we usually have where we sort of pop from subject to subject. And this one was very focused on, excuse me, the getting the what we could do to get the state to address the shortfall in special education funding, the difference between what we spend as a district to meet our obligations to special education students versus what federal and state funding we actually receive. And the gap in Issaquah is quite significant. And this is true for pretty much every district in King County. So the goal was, Dr. Gallinger presented Issaquah numbers, and the goal was to get all the other districts to gather that data for their districts in the same format. We can then go to the state with a group that represents, what was it, a quarter of all the students in the state, and say, this is the scope of the problem, the magnitude of the problem. It was interesting because I also attended the PTSA council meeting this morning where they talked a bit about their legislative priorities. And it's one of the few times where WASDA's priorities are very well aligned with PTSA's priorities, and a number of the other, what we call the alphabet soup groups, you know, the principals and the superintendents, all these different education organizations are all really lined up behind this subject of this is a huge funding shortfall and we need to do something about it. So it was really a meeting for District 2 directors to strategize about what do we do. So a little different from the norm. I thought it was good.
Anyone else? Or our superintendent? It was the first time you were able to attend one with us.
So I thought it was great to be in discussion and conversation rooted in shared information and data that was established by Dr. Gallinger to ground our conversation. We also used effective tools for Mentimeter, for example, which is, I think, a helpful way to gather input live in a meeting. And the passion and support for where we can all coalesce around one issue is a very important effort. And I do think there's an opportunity in front of us that is pretty unique with all the support behind it.
Right. I think it'll be our charge to the legislature for this coming session. And it has a good groundswell behind it. So I'm hopeful for it. Okay. Director Maraldo.
Well, I'm first of all, I think it's been stated, Dr. Gallinger, I just want to appreciate all the effort that you put into gathering the data, putting together a presentation that is effective for all of us gathering together. So it's a good way, use of my time, a good use of the time of the people there. So I want to thank you for that. And I think having a coalesced voice around this issue, you know, when you start talking about half of the funding that ends up not being funded by the state or by the federal government and has to come out of direct levy dollars, half of that being within just our director area 2 is huge. And so because it's also the impact of it's more expensive for us to provide services here because we have to pay more than they do in other parts of the state to have a comparable wage for the area. So I think it's good that the legislature recognize that and hear our united voice, because every dollar that we spend from the levies into our compliance level special education means that we can't look more broadly at it. And my biggest thing, much of what we heard today, if you're going to move the needle on special education, you have to go beyond compliance. It can't be, I checked all the boxes, therefore I'm good. You know, we pulled out the services and we did those things. It's about, did you get the results for the student? And we see that in our data and how many students are actually passing those tests that are in special education. If we want to target getting improvement for students of color, because I don't want to lower standards for students of color. I don't want to lower standards for students with special ed, many of whom are not intellectually disabled. They have their struggles are in other areas. Just because they're struggling with reading or writing doesn't mean that they're struggling intellectually. It's how do you get what's going on in here? I had a son who has dysgraphia. So I know, how do you get what's in the head onto the paper? And we can't do any of those type of level services when we don't even get funded for a compliance model. And I think taking that voice, I am so excited. As a mom who's been doing this for 13 years on the board, you know, started with this when my son was little, special education, both my kids went through it. And we weren't able to serve them to the point that they reached their full potential. And I don't want any more of our students going through the system where in the end, they're not reaching their full potential.
Thank you for that. Director Gallinger?
I just want to say shout out to Issaquah Board and Superintendent for everyone being there. Like many events, we were the only district that was all there. And I think it shows our commitment to this. You know, I think a couple of things in doing this work, the shortfall for the statewide is $418 million. That's the gap for what the state needs to fully fund special education. And of that, $222 million is actually in King County. So every single of the 20 school districts in King County have a funding shortfall. And the point of why we strategically had the meeting in Highlight and wanted to loop in our South King County colleagues is because this is a singular issue that impacts large, small, rich, poor, urban, rural, suburban. Every single one of us is impacted. And so we can't all get behind this. And this, if we can pull this off, this will be one of the first times, at least in the 10 plus years I've been part of ed policy advocacy in the state, where we're speaking with one voice. And I really am excited about this opportunity. So we're going to continue part 2 of this conversation at the Large Schools Caucus in Spokane in a few weeks. So I'd encourage you guys to all join us for that breakfast meeting. And thank you for all of your work and commitment to this.
Director Mullings?
I think you guys have done a great job of describing what the meeting was. I will just say in my 3 years now in this work, hands down, the most effective meeting I've attended. Hands down. I think that what you just described, the opportunity for bringing the districts around the area together on a singular issue of which everyone can focus. I frankly just haven't seen that in the last 3 years. So besides the absolutely phenomenal experience of having that culinary arts program and seeing students in that district at work doing that, which was amazing. For me, it was the most effective I've attended. So thank you.
Okay, we've a little secret, like it was actually not a WASDA sanctioned meeting. So I had 100% control of the agenda and planning and everything. So
good job.
Makes it all the better. Exactly. All right, good. Thank you all. All right, next up is our special education recovery services update. So I will turn it over to our superintendent.
Great, thank you. I'd like to welcome up Dr. Dana Bailey and Shereen Carver to provide a very important update to the board and to the community about our efforts to support our students with IEPs in particular. And a lot of the recovery service work was a result of the need to support our students during and after the pandemic. Well, during and after the past 2 years as we've experienced COVID. And so this is important because it is for students who have needed the most. And I want to make sure that we highlight that effort and provide that information to the community.
Stephen, can I have you help bring the board out, the display out a bit so we can see it better? Okay.
I have a paper copy. Good evening and thank you for the opportunity to share some of our work. I'm Dana Bailey, Assistant Superintendent of Special Services.
Good evening, board. I'm Shereen Carver, Executive Director of Special Services, and we are so honored today to come to you and speak specifically about our recovery and transition recovery services. It's important that we talk about all of the work, the collective work that's been done on behalf of all of our students that receive special education services here in Issaquah School District. In May of 2021, OSPI came to us and said, you have a charge to provide recovery and transition recovery services, working to mitigate the impact of lost learning for our students that receive special education services. That could have been due to missed or limited services or just unique impacts that were specific to our students who are trying to access remote services or hybrid learning. At that time, we really wanted to think about how we could develop a comprehensive plan that was equity driven and that really uniquely considered the unique impacts of our students that receive special education services. When we think about that, we decided we were going to develop a plan, and that plan was thoughtfully constructed, really thinking about what are our commitments and what acknowledgements did we want to make. And I think we might be, okay, I think we're right on track here. I think we got ahead a little bit, but we're back on track. One of the things that we really wanted to think about was what were the specific socio-political factors and how did the pandemic uniquely impact all of our students that receive special education services. We wanted to acknowledge that that experience was unique and it impacted our students who receive special education services in a disproportionate way. We knew that and we wanted to acknowledge it. We also wanted to think about and honor the work, honor what our students experienced, what our community experienced, what our families experienced during that time. We committed to aligning our work very closely to the school district's established academic and student well-being recovery plan as an additional layer, again, to address the known opportunity and equity gaps that exist for our students. We created a data-informed decision-making model that was focused on equity within opportunity. We saw this as our true opportunity, again, to specifically address those known gaps. Ready? Yep. This is a quote after we developed our plan that was shared to us by one of our regional leaders at the Puget Sound ESD, specifically highlighting the intentionality of our plan and thinking about how we really specifically wanted to support students and families first. As we engaged in this work, we really wanted to be proactive and create a sense of urgency. And that is why, as a district, we immediately jumped into action beginning in May of 2021, when we had the call to action from OSPI. We began developing our plan and training our staff, and we began holding recovery services meetings beginning in September of 2021 and held those meetings between September and December. Those meetings were held in a collaborative model, really focused on making data-based decisions, really getting to what were those unique impacts for our students and thinking about where were they pre-pandemic, what was that baseline level of performance, how was their performance impacted between April of 2020 through the end of that school year, so June of 2020, and then through September 2020 through June 21, so the 2021 school year. Really thinking about where were those gaps, did they make expected progress? But one of the other components to this is it wasn't just about expected progress, but also about what were those lost opportunities? What were the times where maybe our students made phenomenal progress, but there were still additional impacts, whether it was to mental health, reading rate and progress, or the ability to move forward with their IEP or access the general education curriculum. We developed a comprehensive plan and a comprehensive framework of how we could meet those unique needs for lots of different students in lots of different ways. We lovingly called it a sandbox in which we were able to say, how can we meet the needs of this student? And maybe those services were on a Wednesday afternoon. Maybe they were during spring break. Maybe they were during the summer. Really thinking about what would serve our families and our students first in order to address those identified needs. It truly was collective work, and we really want to highlight that tonight, and we really want to celebrate all of the work that went into this. First and foremost, we want to thank our staff, our certificated staff, our IEP teams, our parents that attended all of those meetings, our ability to deliver those services, our paraprofessionals, our transportation staff who provided transportation, again, equity and opportunity. We want to make sure you can get to your services, so we provided transportation for kids to get there. Our ISF partners, nursing, I'm probably missing some people, so Dana will make sure to mention a few more. But really, it was a collective effort. It was about how, again, we know that there's a gap. We're committed to serving that. We're committing to making a difference. And this was a nice first step. This next quote came from one of our principals. And as we came back from the pandemic, some of our recovery services meetings were the first opportunities that we had to actually meet with families face-to-face or via Zoom to really talk about how did the pandemic impact you and how did it impact your family and how can we partner again to move the needle. And our principals and our staff shared that they were impactful meetings, and we shared similar feedback from families as well. Dr. Bailey is going to share with you some of the data about the meetings and the progress we've made so far.
I cannot help but smile when I look at this data chart because in the fall of 2021, all families were offered a chance to have a recovery services meeting, a chance to talk, like Shereen Carver shared about how it went at home and in those remote learning times. That represented over 1,700 families were offered an individual, independent, specially designed IEP meeting for recovery services discussion. In the 21-22 school year, which is last year, if you recall, at this time, they were having all those meetings and then they launched recovery services. And over 1,550 students have completed their recovery services package in full, which is a huge celebration because our goal was that we would finish 80%, maybe 85% of the students being completely done with recovery services. And we are, as of October 1st, sitting at just over 90% of all students in the Issaquah School District having completed their recovery services. This is reflective of just under $1.3 million in direct services. So not the indirect services of how extra transportation or extra custodial care. It is the direct services towards staff who delivered the services and had the meetings. And when you've never done anything before, to do something that's huge and to have it come together means everyone was leaning in and everyone was putting this as a priority and making sure that it happened. So this is a point of pride for us. And throughout the year, we hope to continue that progress bar and get to 100% of all students by the end of the school year. I'd like to highlight the April and February breaks, the February and April breaks, because it was part of the part we'd never done before. We hadn't had school during the breaks. So during the breaks, we had an opportunity for families to select from the sandbox 4 days during February break and 4 days during spring break. And imagine that as targeted 16 hours of additional instruction that was just in time. We added things that we hadn't thought about before, such as SBA prep for students in middle school and high school who are going into the SBA after being out for a while. And the Issaquah Schools Foundation leaned in and supported with music therapy and the very favorite adaptive cycling event, which we did in February break, spring break, and in summer school. The summer school is another place where We called it camp for February break and spring break, but summer school, there's a couple more cute pictures. Summer school was a chance for us to really build out the fullness of our idea for having an inclusive summer program. So in summer school, we leaned in to have inclusive programming and much more of everything. So we had full inclusion at high school, full inclusion at middle school, and 3 elementary sites, whereas prior to COVID, we had summer services in 1 of the elementary school sites. This is a favorite activity, and if you ever need a charge, come to Adaptive Cycling Day, because their smiles just absolutely, wrap around their face. Our colleagues leaned in to help us make this happen, and we are just so pleased to look at the results. This is a quote from one of our elementary teachers. She caught me in the halls one day and said, "I don't know what you did that was different in summer school this year, but they're different. The kids came back different, more confident." And confidence is a big part of when you're in the moment of you're struggling with learning. Like, your confidence matters to the learned experience of what you're doing. And I think when we build confidence in students, we build greater opportunity. I wanted to go to let all of you know what to expect of us in 22-23. So this school year, here's our plan. We have the list of the exact students who have remaining recovery services in the hands of building principals. They'll build out those plans to deliver the last 10%. It's just under 150 students. We've been chipping away at that even the last 2 weeks. We have a small number of families who somehow got missed in the recovery services discussions, and that number is less than 10. So we'll have those discussions this year. And we know that we need to have a focused effort to reach out to our families whose students are served in nonprofit agency schools to have the recovery conversation. This recovery services plan is a real point of pride for the special services department. I have said it before, and I'll say it again. I'd put our plan up against anybody, anywhere, as a delivery model that really did work. But the delivery of recovery services is a point of pride for our entire organization and the community of Issaquah. It really did take everybody: bus drivers, nurses, custodians, parents who had their kids stay after school and drove them back when they forgot, teachers who leaned in to do the work, the people who are writing lessons for students they did not know. Everyone leaned in to make this work. So I want to bring that forward as a celebration of our entire community and as an example of when we all lean in to do great things happen. This was a component of the larger recovery services of our district, but at the center of everything that we do, our students did the work. And I know that we can have more recovery go on this school year as the world continues to move to normal. It will be ongoing. We shouldn't have expected that all the recovering for the lost learning was going to happen in one school year, and we are prepared to do it. We are seeing especially struggles in social, emotional, and in math skills, and we are ready to serve. We didn't know what the recovery was going to look like, and we are prepared to do more. Special services values the opportunity to be part of the larger collective of the Issaquah School District, and we're super excited to share this work and continue what we've been doing. And again, the students did the work. That was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of outside of school lessons. And the kids were at the center all the time. So that's your update, and we are here to answer your questions.
Thank you. What an amazing amount of work, both by the special services department and team, but by our students who put in the effort to recover from what has gone on over the last couple of years. So kudos to all of you and to our kids. Thank you. Questions for him? Dr. Gallinger?
I have just immense gratitude to you and your teams and everything that you have done and are continuing to do for our students. Through this process of these focused interventions that seem to have been both timely and effective, has there been thought on the possibility of having these extra times available ongoing?
Well, I'll take the first stab at that question. So After school lessons have been happening, at least in my experience, in the middle schools and high schools and at certain elementary schools before recovery services. So I think some of the elementary schools call it ASAP. The middle schools used to call it seventh period, and the library being open for kids to have access to their teachers if they need an activity bus has been going on for a long while. I think one of the things that we learned through this process is the inclusive model of support learning is very successful. So the inclusive model of summer school was very successful. I also think that students really want to do well. And if they have a choice between spring vacation, playing with my friends, and feeling more confident about my math skills, many students understand what the right choice is there and will say, I really don't want to feel this way about math anymore. So 16 hours of extra math help just in time and before I take the SBA, it was not their favorite choice, but it was a good choice. And lastly, I think the targeted instruction based on what you need right now is key. It's not really all that complex. It's what you need right now and doing it as quickly as possible. And the after school part isn't always favorite, but it can happen. And the middle schools and high schools already have an activity bus, which makes the access to that learning even easier.
Very good. Anyone else? Director Mullins.
I guess it's maybe a follow-up to what you just said, which is what the recovery services, one of the magical parts about it is how coordinated it was. Meeting to plan to execution. Part of what you just described, I guess, is what's regular course and speed outside of the recovery services or for students that didn't fall into this category. I guess my wondering is how does that conversation happen? Like to your point about that there are these additional services that exist at your school that already have an activity bus associated with it. It seems like that's a fairly mature set of information to know that your kiddo needs to access it and to access it. So maybe it's how does it carry forward? How does that momentum stay in place? And how do people get better educated about how to string together some of these resources? Because it's not as obvious outside of the recovery plans.
Sure. Well, there's no command performance and you can't make a student stay after school, but you can provide the opportunities, and the building principal and probably the principal secretary at the front desk is going to be the person who knows those facts. I happen to know Maywood's schedule. I don't know why I know Maywood's schedule, but I do know Maywood's schedule, and they do target the students who most need to be there and say, you need to be there. And there's more room for others who are coming in at the same time. So I agree that communication and helping the students see the urgency of the matter is really important. The after school time has two pieces. There's direct instruction, but there's also help with tonight's homework, because there's sometimes when kids get home and they're alone to do their homework or their family can't help them. So having a teacher who also teaches that content, be the person who's helping them with their homework, is really excellent, as well as when it's test prep, when they're preparing for a test. They often say that in the middle schools anyway, the sessions that are most well attended are the ones that are the week of a test. So the students know they have a test on Thursday, they come to math help on Tuesday. So making sure that the students know how to get there and they know how to take the activity bus home and they know who's teaching what and in what room, I think is a really important part.
Thank you. And I think the other piece I'd like to add, Director Mullins, is that one of the things that was so successful about recovery services is that it was targeted and intentional. So really thinking about those specific areas of SDI, thinking about direct and explicit instruction. And so I do think that there is an opportunity within the existing structures for us to improve and think about how can we be more intentional and targeted for specific student needs to address gaps in student learning. So I do think there's opportunity to leverage existing systems and improve on them through innovation.
Great, thank you. No. Anybody else have any comments, or Superintendent?
I just want to say thank you. Thank you for leading this work. And I know it took a lot of effort to coordinate. And I do think that there are a lot of lessons that apply for all students. And so we should take those forward and see how that can be part of how we do things moving forward for all students who need help.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much for the update, and we look forward to hearing from you when you hit that 100%, because I know you're going to do it, because the kids are going to do it. All right. Thank you very much.
And we should just point out that's yet another unfunded mandate.
It is.
That,
It is an
we charged
inadequately
through and,
funded
did.
mandate. Yes. So. All right. We are on to works in progress.
Great, thank you. So a couple of things. I did get a chance to tell the board this yet, but I had the opportunity to see Vice President Kamala Harris when she was in town yesterday. And I was invited to join the I guess sort of the announcement time where she announced the $1 billion in funding available to all 50 states to purchase electric or cleaner running school buses as part of the infrastructure bill. And that $1 billion is part of a $5 billion 5-year commitment. It's a rebate model. There have been 4 schools that have sort of gone forward and 4 districts that have gone forward with that process to date. But it was pretty powerful to see the commitment that this state has made in action as it relates to what is considered the largest public transportation system in the country, which is school buses. So that was pretty neat as an opportunity to be able to be part of that, although it did take some traffic navigation in downtown Seattle, which was slightly annoying, but but expected. So I wanted to share that. And our commitment as a district is to start to do that. So this will be a helpful, it is more expensive to go with a replacement school bus that is cleaner and more energy efficient or electric in nature. And so we will be fully leveraging the opportunities that exist and starting to make steps into that direction as well. The other big thing that happened this week was top of mind for many people that I have received lots of questions about has been what are those 2022 NAEP results mean for Issaquah, or what does the data say for Issaquah? And basically the NAEP results, or the nation's report card, have found that there have been decreases in 4th and 8th grade literacy and math achievement across the country. And it's quite notable, especially in comparison to 2019. We actually did have 2 schools that participated in the testing, both Pine Lake Middle School and Echo Glen. Again, it's just a sample. They take representative samples across the state to utilize for statewide report card and reporting out. As the public knows and the board knows, Issaquah students do score at significantly higher rates of proficiency than our state average itself, and on national tests such as the Smarter Balance Assessment as referenced earlier. But our data is somewhat similar, where we are honing in on 8th grade math in particular. And so we know that and have discussed that with the board. And you heard that reference also in our most recent presentation on recovery services, and we're focused on that work. So I just wanted to comment on that a little bit as it relates to a national trend and national data point. Some things that are happening district-wide. On Monday, we had our non-student day, which is also a professional learning day for our teachers. And it started with, and I got to spend a good hour or so with the first training with Rosetta Lee on cross-cultural communication and engagement. So that was a pretty powerful session as we think about our work in EL 16 in particular, and helping to provide reflection opportunities and new learning for our staff to think about the different ways that we all communicate and are based on our backgrounds, our different identity markers, and what that might mean. So that was a pretty powerful session and day of learning. And I know that the learning across the school buildings afterwards was quite powerful for some of our building administrators. We also are starting to work more with the Puget Sound ESD. Sometimes it's back to the alphabet soup. Puget Sound ESD. And there is an Educators of Color Leadership community that is facilitated by the ESD. And we now have 10 certificated folks and 1 assistant principal attending. So that's a great opportunity to take advantage of a community based on affinity and caucusing. We've also, in other news, have been approved and cleared more than 5,500 volunteers to work in our schools. So at a time during COVID when volunteering was not happening, this is just a welcome sort of an exciting number to see because it's more help for our schools and leveraging the talents and gifts of our community, which is really nice. That was 5,500. As was mentioned in public comment, October is a month of many different awareness areas, but in particular, anti-bullying and disability awareness. And so we've had many schools consider how to make that connection through their activities and through their curriculum, as well as through our commitment to equity and kindness and inclusion. We've also had Principal Appreciation Month. So student artist volunteers actually created portraits of our principals in order to show their appreciation of them. We've been posting them on our Instagram accounts, both the district Instagram account, as well as my own personal Instagram account. And it's great to see the portraits. They're just amazing. And they really do look very similar to how our principals look in person. So it's pretty incredible, the artists that we have in our student population. We have also been partnering with the Issaquah Schools Foundation to implement and provide more access to food in the morning through breakfast at some of our school sites. So that's been a pretty important additional note. And we'll be moving forward with organizing a group to understand what the need might be and some other solutions to continue that beyond just the grant period that the ISF has provided breakfast for some of our students. Last week was National Bus Safety Week. I just want to note that because I haven't had a chance to tell that to the board yet, and I just want to highlight it. There's been a lot going on. And we also had a community forum last week. So we had the opportunity to welcome over 40 individuals to participate in our community forum for the beginning of this year. And the purpose was really to provide an opportunity for participants to share their experience and their perspective, identify common needs across the community, and inform district-wide planning and priorities. So Directors Weaver and Gallender attended as participants. Thank you. It was great to hear or see. Wasn't at both of your tables full time, but to see you participating with your hats on as parents and former parents in the district and community members, which was awesome. And we heard great stories of our staff supporting each of our students and creating relationships that lead to learning. We heard a very strong appreciation for the many programs and activities that support our students to learn, to grow, and to explore their passion and their possible interest in that could become a passion. Participants shared a lot of their thoughts about what they hope to be true for their child in the next 10 to 20 years. And that was powerful to hear as the focus was about being successful in life and having and whatever their student so chose. And that's an important distinction from just saying it must be one pathway, it must be college, or it must be career. And so it's very important that it is very important, I believe, and align with this too, that our students become great contributing members of our society. They are already, but they continue to do so in the many ways that they want to, and that they have all the choices available to them that they can take advantage of. So that was great. We also got many ideas for the district to consider, and those are all things we're considering and noting right now. We also did this in simultaneous interpretation style. So we had 2 Spanish speaking tables that discussed their input and perspective and experiences in Spanish. We did offer Mandarin as well. There was not anyone that wanted to take advantage of the Mandarin option, but we had that proactively available in case someone walked in the door, because Spanish and Mandarin are our top 2 languages. And as a note, we have these thought exchanges running right now in parallel, which ask the same questions. So we invite many more people to contribute to that and to evolve the initial insights and trends that I just shared with you that came out of that community forum. And that will close on November 3rd. Finally, just some exciting sort of ongoing first 100 days and engagement updates. I do have a couple of meetings coming up with all the ASB leaders, which I believe Paige had given as a comment very specifically in her EL8 pre-comment input. And that's much appreciated. You wouldn't see that reflected right now because that's looking back last year, but you will see that reflected next year if you go back and look at the monitoring boards. And then there's a lot of great activity this week engaging with the PTSA Council, which I see members here in this room who are attending that. I spoke to the Rotary group and the Kiwanis group. sometimes wonder if I'm saying that correctly. But that was great. And we have a lot of actual former school board members who are part of those groups. And so it was great to connect with those individuals and leaders in the community. And we had an ISF Board Foundation meeting. So that's just a snapshot of what's happening. Really just want to sort of wrap up and just say it's been busy and it will continue to be busy, but it's been great to be able to get out into the community and to continue to meet new people and to engage and learn and to share and highlight the really good work that's happening here in the district.
What a busy time. That is a lot of connections. Does anybody have any questions for her? All right. Well, thank you for that update. I am glad to see all that was going on. All right, we are on to EL3 Personnel Administration. So we'll start with the motion.
I move the board accept the annual internal monitoring report for EL3 Personnel Administration as presented.
Second.
All right, I will turn it over to you, Superintendent, for what you'd like to point out, and then we can have a bit of a discussion, and then I will ask for public comment at the end.
Great. I have a few points actually just to sort of share, but I wanted to thank a student representative, Jordan Lee, for input on EL3. There were some great ideas for moving forward and how we can really, do more right with our work on personnel management, and appreciate that level of input that was gathered in preparation for that student input and the consolidated synthesis. And in particular, Jordan emailed staff, asked other students and asked teachers about their perspective and input on EL3 specifically. A couple of things to note about how I approached this, but really went through the interpretation to try and make sure it was aligned with what I was seeing in the EL, and added a couple of additional details, a general interpretation itself, which is consistent with some of the other executive limitation monitoring reports, clarified some of our values around talent, specifically role and responsibility and clarity at various stages of where we engage with employees, and added some details around wanting to attract a diverse and qualified pool of applicants. I think it was very specifically stated that we always have a high quality pool of applicants, but I believe that it's got to be both diverse and high quality. And that's something I just sort of wanted to be very clear in our interpretation. And I did add some specific additional notes around updating job descriptions for when each position comes up as available, as well as to ongoing make sure that if there are any changes to duties that we also note that and update job descriptions when that happens. With many of the changes in roles last year, we shuffled some of the responsibilities around. So it's important for us to actually update not just when there's new positions, but when positions might change as well. So those are my highlights, and I'm eager to get the board's questions and comments and reflections.
Yeah, I'll open it up to the board. Director Moraldo.
Well, I thank you for putting this on the agenda. I know it was on the consent agenda previously, but I wanted to kind of say why I did was looking at number 12. Do we need support back there? Okay, I'll continue on. So on number 12, it reads, the superintendent may not fail to, consistent with the superintendent's own evaluation, evaluate all employee performance according to their contribution towards achieving the board's ends, policies, and their compliance with the board's executive limitation and policies. And I thought this was an interesting, I think what piqued my curiosity on this was really considering after our last SIP meeting, how many of the staff members talked about our changes to EL12 and how that impacted their work and how it impacted the other work. And it was really the first time in the 13 years that I've been here that I felt like we were actually having staff members that felt more ownership to the executive limitations and the ends and their personal contribution. The thing is, the way our evaluation system is written, it's not necessarily that way, right? So as the superintendent has drawn in, we're very specific that we're using this approved Danielson framework to do the evaluation, not the ends or the executive limitations. And I think that's the way it's been negotiated. That's really the way it works in the system of schools. So either we change what we've negotiated. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying that's one option, or we change what our expectation is of the superintendent. And are we really expecting her to evaluate all employee performance according to their contribution towards achieving the board's ends? How do we marry those two together, and how do we reflect that in our words? So I actually think it's board work that we need to really consider what it is we're asking for, as opposed to what we have here, because I think what we have here, we know isn't going to happen. And that's, so we need to put in what she can actually comply with. And I think understanding that.
Right, because all staff or certificated staff are approved on that Danielson framework, which hopefully is, well.
And so that was the other is
aligning
are we
to
asking her to determine how do the ends and executive limitations align with the Danielson framework for those conversations? How did she create an environment in which the ends and executive limitations? I would like to have more feeling that the staff is considering the ends and executive limitations as we are doing our work and doing their work. And so how do we get there? Right? Because that's really it. We want everybody to feel a sense of ownership of it, but they don't really do that in the evaluation process.
Because the evaluation doesn't necessarily tie back to the ends and EL.
Might that be a retreat topic?
That could be a retreat topic. What'd she say? I know. Well, that's something we're gonna have to ponder.
I mean, I will note that in the prior interpretation, it said aligned. And as I was discussing with Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, Donna Hood, alignment is different from in consideration of and in context of, because we have these other things we also need to consider for different employee groups as we evaluate them as well. So the language here to me is trying to comply with the way it's stated, but I'm open to how that might be talked about and as we move forward and honored as well.
All right. I've made a note of that for a future retreat topic that we can ponder at. All right, other things. Okay, if there isn't anything else right here, do we have any public comment on this agenda item? And if there is, they can either raise their hand in Zoom or raise their hand here. All right. Doesn't seem like anything. All right. So if there's nothing else, then all those in favor of approval of EL3 personnel administration is presented, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, and that one passes for you. All right. Excellent. Oh, yes, that would help too if you write your note in there, because that'll help us bring it back. I've made a note for retreat, but having it down twice will be
I
very helpful.
did this to myself. I should
Yeah,
at least
you
write it
should.
down.
Definitely follow up on that note. That is your job. All right, and next up we have EL8 communications and support, and we'll start with a motion.
I move the board accept the internal annual monitoring report for EL8 communications and support to the board as presented.
Second.
All right, and I will turn it over to Superintendent if you want to walk us through some items in it.
Great. I want to thank both Paige and Tarang, who are our student representatives, for their input to EL8. They talked about some additional details on some trends that we can be more specific about in the future for what's happening in education at large. We can add that into the future, and also some additional details that were requested, and I appreciate that, and we will do that as we look at this year in particular. I do want to note that EL8 was an interesting one to review and to prepare for today, because so much of it was about last year, and last year as it relates to the superintendent and the board communications and support, I was not here for to be able to fully talk about. So I actually, the language here is very different because I did talk about the prior superintendent, just to make that very clear in the monitoring report. So, but I do, and through the support of, many team members, including Diane to my right, was able to attest to that evidence in the monitoring report that's been noted. I did update interpretations to include proactive communications and to notate that systems and structures are necessary for what I would say is not only seamless information flow, but also naming that the board engages in inquiry and discussion. So it's not only limited to monitoring reports and action items, and it's important to follow the thread of inquiry as it relates to what questions or queries might be top of mind for the board, and to bring that to the conversation in the right way that meets the needs of the board. And so it's not just action and monitoring that the board engages in with the district. I also added some notes across the different areas on getting feedback on communications. That needs to be very clear that, in my mind, that there's the board preference as a whole, right? But there's also individual preferences, and that's something that we would work to keep in mind, and especially I would work to keep in mind. I added a very specific note around non-compliance. So sometimes we don't want to hear about non-compliance in the monitoring report. And sometimes, so it's important for me and the district to be able to prepare the board for any non-compliance that might exist. I think a good example was how there was some shifting of when one of the ELs was on the monitoring calendar last year. But I also would say, even if there's anticipation of non-compliance, it's helpful to have that information as often or early as possible. And noting that it would be important to also share that there's a plan in place. So there would be instances where non-compliance might happen due to some factor that might be external or difficult or new to how we've handled situations, but that it's clear that there's a plan in place to address it. And that's notated as well. I already spoke about sort of adding a little more updates on relevant trends in public education and the market at large. It's not just education, but the world also impacts us, as we learned during the past few years. And yeah, those are the main updates. So that was sort of threaded throughout. I wasn't giving you a very list by list chronological, but hoping to really ensure that this year, with my own style, communication patterns, and learning about this board, with feedback from you all, that you'll see additional new updates in next year's monitoring report as a result of this year's happening.
Great. And that's good to hear, because I think this is a good opportunity for all fresh eyes on it and to take your spin on it. So for me, that's great. All right, I'll open it up to any questions, comments. All right.
I was just giving other people a chance. Sorry, Sydney.
Oh, I was waiting for you.
Okay, Director Gallinger.
You knew I was going to say something, huh? So number 11, page 6. Fail to establish a procedure for informing the board in a timely manner of the disposition of complaints presented to the superintendent by the board. I just want to get clarity on your interpretation of this, because this is now your updated interpretation. Is this correct? Yeah. So of the handling of community concerns and complaints, we're talking about the official 4220 complaints. And my question is do we, and this might be of the board, do we have another place where we track what the disposition of those complaints are, like on a trend basis? And because I feel like we have talked about it, but I didn't know, because some of this is redundancy, but I don't remember this one in particular. Because what I'd really like to know is, on a given year, if all of a sudden we see a spike of, wow, we've had 12 4220 complaints that have gone up to the level of the superintendent, and 3 of those have then been board hearings. And last year we had 1. I think that for me would be an important thing to see. So since that is something that actually has numbers associated with it, for me, I would love to see a table there with by school year and the number of complaints that get up to, and I don't know whether the board, this is a question of the board, once it get like, I would probably want to know if they get to the cabinet level, whether or not they get to the superintendent level, and then how many of those then go to board appeal. That would be an important part of it, because while we've talked ad nauseum about how this 4220 doesn't really scratch the itch about what we're really trying to get from a feedback loop with the community, nonetheless, that's the data we currently have, and that's what's listed in a bullet point. So for me, I would appreciate in for looking ahead to see what the trend line data is. So that's my first comment. But if you have feedback on that, then I'll go to my next one afterward. Yeah.
On that point, actually in EL3, one of the things, well, I guess I didn't make a comment, is because one of the things I appreciated in EL3 that we just finished was actually getting more specific numeric values about just that, about the complaints and what the categorization of them from EL3. So to your point about, is there another place? Maybe that's where in the future we can get the trending from there, but I thought that was an improvement with 3.
Right on number 15 in 3.
Or number 5.
Number 5 is what I was looking at in number 5 in EL3
Yeah.
is what I was referring to just now.
Oh, okay. I see.
Oh,
what you're
yeah.
saying.
the number of complaints.
Yes.
And I know I personally prefer 3 years to see trend. I don't know, the board really probably should make some sort of by consensus or head nod, so the administration knows what they should kind of as a pattern have for any sort of data set, because I think that would be helpful for our superintendent and her team.
I usually have been okay. I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
Director.
Director.
I usually am okay with 3 years, but we have so few of those type of complaints that go through the system. I think, and I wrote it down as in parentheses, maybe 5 might be better.
We don't actually know, right? Because we wouldn't know the complaints that go to cabinet, that we only know the complaints that go to cabinet that don't get dispositioned by cabinet. So I actually don't know. Like, I know that on average in the board, we probably hear 3 on a given year. Sometimes it's 1, sometimes it's 5. On average,
Right.
it's
We only know
probably-
how many get to us.
But right, we don't know how many went to the cabinet. And that's why I think that's why it would be helpful to know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, would it be possible to ask for it for 5 years, and then if that's too much, put it down to 3?
And are you saying 5 years just for this particular one because it's a low frequency thing, not 5 years for all,
Exactly, yes.
but in general, 3 years for?
I am typically okay with 3 years around other things, but I think this one, because I think there's fewer data points, getting a 5-year trend would be more appreciated.
And this is 4220s that make it to the cabinet.
That would be my recommendation, because in general, the cabinet probably dispositions most of them. I think because we only get to see what we see, sometimes it feels like, does the cabinet disposition any of them? I suspect they disposition most of them.
Yeah.
But sometimes it feels like we are seeing all the appeals, and I suspect we're not seeing hardly anything.
I agree.
And
but
that's why
don't
that
know.
and that's why it would show that.
Right.
So it seems like there was a lot of head looking at me. And so that wasn't quite nods, but in response to the
Yeah.
5-year,
Yeah.
in response to the 5-year, I saw
Yeah.
a lot of looking at. So I think there was a good, that was
Yeah.
a good signal nonverbal.
Yeah, it's to give
I
it
think
a,
we were just trying to make sure that that was a doable
A
thing.
doable
and
thing.
your-
So I
your
don't,
eyes
know-
didn't
I
get
don't know the
rolled in.
answer. So I think we need to look at how we've collected our data and whether or not with different transitions that we can, with fidelity display, that. But we will certainly come back to the board on that one before next year, obviously, to share what might be feasible on the 5-year, 3 to 5 year.
And then my other comment is on page 2, item number 3. Shall not neglect to submit decision information required periodically by the board. Not that one, but this clause, or fail to inform the board of relevant trends. And the interpretation is, I interpret this to mean that I will provide information and data required for board decision and action. In addition, I interpret this to mean that I will provide updates to the board about trends in public education in a local and national level, innovative ideas for district operations, and relevant updates on evidence-based practices in support of student learning and well-being. I wanted just to say that for me, relevant trends, and this is where it applies to this school year, is also, at least in my mind, is inclusive of what's happening in our buildings that potentially could become a trend. Example would be if we start to see a lot of racially motivated social media posts in a feeder pattern, or if we start to hear of, well, gosh, now we've seen where there have been 5 fights at Beaver Lake, as it has happened before in the previous year, like you're new to our system, so you might not know that that would be a trend that we would actually want to know about. So just to provide context for you on, like, that would be an important thing that I would want to hear from you about something, a significant thing that's happening in a feeder pattern or in a particular building from a cultural, because our district is so big, and I could share and have a generally reasonable pulse on Skyline community, for example, because that's where I live and that's where I could go to school. I truly would have no concept unless I hear it from community members about like Liberty or Issaquah community, more so Issaquah, because there's still so much interplay between the two, with Sammamish being part of Issaquah High School. But my point is from a this year standpoint, this would be something that there have been things that have happened in our buildings that I think would be important and relevant for the board to be aware of, that I haven't heard about, but I've heard from community members, particularly about there being a lot of after school challenges for instance, at Issaquah High School, that I think would be important for the board to be aware of.
Thank you.
And so would you say, like, just highlighting that sort of thing in a Friday update would scratch that itch? Or, I mean, how would you want to be made aware of that? I guess.
I mean, it depends on what it is. I think at the minimum, that for sure, but it was more, I was commenting because it veers from her interpretation of it. That's why I was bringing that up.
Okay.
Otherwise, it would be unfair to then me a year from now be like, well, I'm not supporting this because I disagree with that interpretation. So I'm letting her know now. Like, I think I think youth grid is like sort of the national holistic view of like, what are the trends in education? And I'm really like looking hyper local, like what's going on in our district, because we do have 3 distinct regions in our district. And we all, because we represent and live in our respective region, we may not have the pulse of those other regions, yet it's our responsibility to collectively know that. And you, as a superintendent, like know and touch everything. And we are in silos. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me. Thank you. Because I was viewing trends in a different lens, and I appreciate the that perspective on that. And I agree that makes sense to apply to both our schools internally, but also the world at large. So thank you.
Yeah, and I would say that definitely things that, such as I made the joke last year, middle schoolers have gone feral, but, based on kind of the information that we were having, behavioral issues at the middle school level. And for me, it's more than just communication. It's like identification. This is a trend. And so here's how we are addressing it. So what do you do when middle schoolers have gone feral? And is it that bad this year? So like, that's the other trend. Is it better this year? I don't know. I don't have a middle schooler.
Like one of the things that we've heard this year is that would be something to, and I don't know where this fits, but an example would be, so the last 2 years, or the last year, I guess was, because we were in our buildings, like lunch was free for everyone, right? And so this year, I've heard across multiple buildings that the lack of breakfast access has been a real challenge for a lot of our students. That is an important trend that I feel like if anyone in this district has the ability to control it and influence it right now, it's these 6 people right here. But that would be a relevant trend that I think we should have awareness to, because it's a huge departure from what was last year. And then what is this year's, because right, the federal funding that fully supported that was really important for us, because that is a huge point of even not just how do we impact it ours locally, but then that could impact what do we advocate for at the state and national level, because we all advocate statewide and then Marnie and I advocate nationally. So that would be an important trend for us to know as an example. So I'm just trying to give you context and examples so you have a sense on it.
Good. Good.
Other things? Okay. If nothing else for the moment, I'll open it up to public comment to anybody in the room or on Zoom. If they'd like to make public comment on this particular one. Zero? Okay, thank you. Anything else? Did you have one? You're good? Okay. I just want to make sure before we go on. Okay, all those in favor of approval of EL8 communication and support, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Oppose. And that one passes. So thank you very much. And Marnie, you've made notes on that one. Okay, thank you. That's going to be helpful. All right, we are on to legislative matters. So Director Gallinger.
Okay, so let me hand this updated. I think we're kind of pretty much to our final version unless you see like wordsmithing issues. So you can skip Director Weaver because she has one because she was there sharing and our superintendent.
You've had a lot of opportunities to look at
So
it.
those, yeah, that's for you and her. Okay.
That's for you, because others got one too.
You've got one?
Because our superintendent's been there.
Okay, good.
So first I want to say thank you to our superintendent and to Director Moraldo and Director Weaver for joining me. And we've had meeting with 4 legislators at this point. So thank you. We hosted Representative Sen and Ty at Cedar Trails. And the intent of that was to really showcase our inclusive classrooms and the amount of social emotional learning and supports that are just embedded within our elementary curriculum, because that's a passion for both of those. Today, we met with Representative Ramos here and then Senator Mullet at Cougar Mountain. And I appreciate the opportunity to be able to share with them on the context of where we are post-COVID. And that's what the top 2 boxes of this sheet are. And then really, you'll look at the footnote under that, which was added from last night to today, because Superintendent Reichdahl decided to drop a bomb last week and say that he wants to cap regionalization at 12%. And so we're at 18%. That would be a 50% drop in regionalization for Issaquah, which would be a greater than $10 million problem. And the context for that is we're advocating for them to fully fund special education. And that is the singular ask that we're asking for this year. And there's alignment between what the Washington State school directors are asking for, what administrators are asking for, what PTA is asking for. And so this is a really great opportunity. But if we do that and they do that at the expense of regionalization, we actually are a net negative. So we stand to lose more from regionalization than we would gain from fully funding special education. So this is a really big deal. So that footnote, just, you know, as you have elevator talks with people as we go through this year and go into this legislative session, is really, really important. And we talked with our superintendent today, which I think she said she may elevate that at the next PSESD superintendent meeting. But also it'd be great if we got the impact from all of our King County CFOs to know, and I know are still just trying to process the bomb that got dropped in the press release last week as well. But we need to know what the scale and magnitude is of this, because we've lived through McCleary and how it got sort of fixed on the backs of East King County before. And it seems like they want to take away some deck chairs and just rearrange the others and call it like, oh, look at, we gave you more money. Like you actually took away money.
Right. And what was the rationale for just making this change? Because I didn't see his news conference where this was dropped.
I think it's to be able to free up money to do more special education funding.
But I have a question. Given that all of the districts have, negotiated teacher contracts that go out 3-4 years, whatever, based on the assumption of 18%, how is this anything but a money grab, a budget takeaway? It's not like we can suddenly adjust and reduce salaries by 6%. I mean, how is it not just a money takeaway?
Well, I think you could. I mean, the answer is we don't want to do that. But I think in any contract, right, if the state apportionment decreases, I think there's language in there about that. But that's not where we're headed.
Right, yeah,
that's why we have to leverage with our school unit, bargaining units and partners to really help them also share that this is a takeaway. And so that's the footnote for number one. The second one is that's our focus. And I wanted you to be able to, and I want to talk through this so you have this. We are going to message, and we have asked every district in King County to come up with a very similar looking table so they can showcase what is the impact of special education dollars. And for us, almost 1 in 4 of our local dollars goes to fund special education that is not funded by the state and federal government. And we're not even saying that we are funding enough. To Marnie's point of we fund based on compliance, not really based on like our dream need support that we would like to do. But that just funding on compliance is $12.8 million that is coming out of our local levy. So any money that we can get towards special education will help us locally. So the first footnote is for you to understand what the safety net formula is. And so we get an apportionment for a student, and then we have to spend an additional $26,567 on that special education student. And then we can ask for safety net funding. So thank you to your team, Heather, and Assistant Superintendent Bailey for getting us this information, explaining this formula to us, because it allows us to, in a very quick way, explain to the legislators why this is such a problem. And in King County, all 20 school districts are underfunded for special education. And I explained it to our senator today, and I think the light went on. Is like, right, because there's no regionalization for special education funding. Because it's like, why is it so hyper local that King County is the problem? And the reason why is because think about all the therapists and speech and language pathologists and case management and healthcare that we have to provide to these students at King County wages. That is going to be very different than what you would be paying in other parts of the state. And so without that regionalization, essentially our special education gap is magnified. So that was, I think, really helpful for them to see. I then wanted to highlight the great work that our special education team has done with 91% of our students have completed the recovery services. And then explain that in spite of that mandate, it still has cost us like $1.3 million that we haven't gotten funded from the state. And then lastly, the third bullet is we've continued to do and make strides in inclusive practices, and that's going to be an ongoing opportunity for us. Only got $80,000 for some pilot work a year and a half ago. We're spending much, much more than that, and would spend much more than that, to Marnie's point, if we wanted to do that like really well. So we probably wouldn't be able to find the staff right now to do it to the level we would want to do it. The last one of the third section is the enhanced funding that we got over this past year for nurses, social workers, psychologists, and counselors. And in it, it shows that we got an additional $2.2 million for those positions, which was helpful, but it didn't add new staff to our district because we were already over supporting, according to the state, our buildings, which I don't think anyone in this room feels like we're providing more supports than our students need. And so the gap is still $6.5 million. So it was a nod to thank our representatives who worked really hard to push this through, and particularly our legislators did this. So I wanted to acknowledge that, but also still show like, hey, there's still work to be done. Like we always feel that, like we always have work to be done. So I want to pause on this right now to see one, if there's any questions, and two, to let Dr. Moraldo and Weaver to be able to share, and our superintendent, any other thoughts about our legislative encounters so far.
Dr. Moraldo?
I'll go first. I appreciated the meeting that I was in was with Representative Sen and Representative Ty, and I really appreciated Harlan, again, always so thoughtful, taking us to Cedar Trails, not only because it's a new school that we could show them the building, but that we are doing some of the inclusive practices in there. The tour, I think, was really impactful in so many ways for the representatives to be able to see what our buildings are built like. And we could talk very briefly and on the side about SCAP funding, to talk about just how inclusion practices work, how we utilize so many spaces within the building to provide services, and kind of what that impact is, how we're utilizing some space to be able to provide, small breakfast snacks and things like that for students who don't necessarily have the ability to have breakfast at home or to bring a snack, and how do we deal with that? So I think there were some really good conversations. And I really appreciated they were very receptive to that work, to the work that we're doing and to the data that they received as to what it is they're going to be able to do in the legislature. So, I mean, I thought it was a really good meeting, really sounded hopeful.
Gertrude Weaver?
So we had two separate meetings, and the first one was here with Representative Ramos. And that was an interesting conversation because he fully acknowledges that education is not his expertise. He relies on Representative Allen, who is much more, knows much more about it. At the same time, because Director Gallanger's fact sheet was so well laid out, he's like, he acknowledged right away, yeah, special ed, that's where we haven't stepped up. That's where we've never met the budget requirements. So, but I think he was probably a bit surprised by the scope of the numbers and things like how that safety net is calculated. Honestly, I didn't know that either. So it was very eye-opening for him, and he was certainly very receptive to everything we gave him and told him, and also somewhat appalled by the regionalization conversation. Senator Mullet was interesting. He was very dismissive of the regionalization thing. He said, oh, I don't think he's got the votes for that. And I thought, well, I certainly hope not, but let's keep that ball rolling. Again, he was very much aware of the shortfall, but not necessarily the numbers. I think he seemed to understand a little bit less of the counselor, nurses, support staff conversation about how, they give us more money. People expect that we're going to hire more people, and the public is surprised. Why don't we have more counselors? They gave you more money. Well, what they really did was just reduce the shortfall that we have because we've already hired more than they expect us to. So that was an interesting conversation. And I certainly appreciate the time they both took out of their schedules. We took Senator Mullet to Cougar Mountain Middle School, which is the engineering marvel of our district. I think he was impressed. And thank you to Principal McKee, who gave us a quick guided tour of that building. So they were both very good meetings. And I think both Representative Ramos and Senator Mullet were very receptive to everything we talked about.
Excellent. And Superintendent, you were there as well.
Yes, so I wanted to echo Director Gallanger's appreciation for both Dr. Dana Bailey for laying out some of the sort of drivers behind costs and how those formulas and how they work, and Martin Turney, our Chief Financial Officer and Chief Operating Officer, and with the support also of Mariah Vanasek, who's the Executive Director of Finance and Business Services. So the team has been supportive of that. I think how Director Gallanger laid out the high-level details of both the problem, the opportunity, and the complexity that is underneath that was very helpful and very clear. And I saw a lot of aha moments from our elected officials who are weighing this very deeply, and I appreciate that as well. I've spent some time this whole week, and since our first round of meetings, I think last week now, debriefing daily with Martin specifically on some of this, and we look forward to continuing to provide the support, and also in the spaces where we also are meeting with our job-alike peers, essentially to align on the kinds of support we need to put in place to continue to tell our story, to continue to highlight the problem and the opportunity, in a cohesive, coalesced fashion. So we will commit to doing that.
Feel free to share this with your cabinet if you want, since it's now in its final state. So was there any questions from?
Okay. Great. Thank you for all the work on it.
Attached to the agenda today was WASDA's rough draft of their top 10 priorities, which they distilled into 5 talking points with language underneath each. And so they'll now make it a pretty picture, but did want you to be able to have that in front of you. The last bullet under the fully or amply and equitably funding is going to be modified to really acknowledge the regionalization challenge. So that was, again, this is the rough draft. The final version is going to have slightly different language to acknowledge the regionalization challenge that has now been dropped in our lap. Because again, this was published also before Little Press Conference.
Yeah, I have a question on this. Particularly if it's not a final draft, it's worth asking on the 1, 2, 3rd paragraph, the very last bullet that says, ensure that no school district adjacent to another experiences a difference of regionalization factor. Wouldn't that mathematically just mean that the whole state was in the same place?
Yes, so the WASDA board said no. So this is one of that's what's going to get changed.
Okay.
Because we're like,
Because I read that and thought
no.
that makes no sense.
And the thing is, and I was on, well, 90% of the board was on the phone driving somewhere last night when because we had the meeting just prior to our, our other meeting. Yeah, so it was a busy day yesterday. And so that was really I was not able to ask questions because I didn't want to fiddle with my phone to try to raise my hand and all of that to go, where did that come from? Because I don't think that's anywhere in any of our positions. And so I really need to get a deeper dive on what would possess them to type those words. Because clearly all of these need to be able to go back to this thing. And I know that during delegate assembly, it was really hard for me to manage all of that because I like to have a book with everything written so I can say who voted on what, and it was all online. So I know that they did some, what do they call it? Consolidation of some positions. And one of them was around all of the language around funding and levies. And because I was the emergency delegate, I was literally reading them right before we were voting on them. And so I didn't really respond to whatever that is. So I'm wondering if somewhere in that consolidation is some language that somehow East King County just let slip through, because I can't imagine that any of us would have agreed. So I need to find out, where did that language come from? Because that's just crazy.
To have a regionalization factor,
That's the
by
point.
definition, somewhere there's going to be a line where it's different.
And I think our language was more around that there's no significant difference between
I
them,
wondered if
right?
that's what
So
they
it
were
really,
really trying to.
and is
say.
it
They lost some words.
Puyallup or Auburn that I think it's Puyallup that has like they're next to Federal Way or is it Federal Way?
It's Puyallup and Sumner. And so it's 6% difference between essentially the same community.
Right, maybe 2 steps, shouldn't be
But-
2 steps apart
Yeah.
from each other or something.
And that's just 6%. It's just 1%. But then
Oh.
if you have the seniority factor, so there is an example of what this was used. So in Snohomish or Skagit County, where there's a district because of the 4% enhanced for seniority that are at 22%. And they're adjacent to a district that's at 12%.
Oh, yeah, see, that's hard.
And so that's the big gap. So the intent is to have no bigger than 3%
Right, okay,
difference in regionalization between it. And so
okay, that could make more sense.
And especially in that case, you have one district that gets more money because they've had their teachers for longer. And the other district can't keep teachers because as soon as they get to a certain level of experience, they go to the other district. So they'll always never have teachers that aren't there for very long to be able to get that factor. So it just continues the cycle.
Yeah, they're in a catch-22.
yes.
Okay.
So I just wanted to make that since so everyone here, since they aren't seeing it, but the 5 things that the WASA titled it is meet the requirements for special education top. First time the special education has ever been the top of WASDA's legislative platform. Provide the necessary resources for ample, equitable, and stable education. Feed students, construct safe and healthy schools, transport each and every student. And so I chair the Large Schools Caucus for our state and certainly been carrying this special education platform as well. So at every venue I have a chance to talk about, we're going to be talking about special education because the legislators that we've been talking to already know, like, hey, this is going to be the topic, and we are well aware that this is going to be where we're going to have an opportunity or challenge to invest, however they look at it.
Right, as long as they're not investing with the money they pull back from regionalization, because
Exactly.
that is just not a net gain. Okay, anything else? Anything
I
else?
think lastly is, and if you want to do this in the calendaring part about our one with Representative.
Oh, you can do that
Cal-
here.
Okay, so the one that was scheduled for tomorrow needed to be rescheduled, so it's rescheduled for next Tuesday at 2:30. So, looking to see if there's someone's available. Should be November 1st at 2:30, currently scheduled to be here in their district office. Then while people are looking, then the last one they'll have to schedule is with Senator Wellman. And it's good that we end with her as the chair of K-12 education for the state.
I'm sorry, I was typing. Can you read the date again?
Tuesday, November 1st at 2:30, district office.
I can, but I've already done two.
I can, but if Ann can do it, give her the opportunity first.
I'm heading out of town that
Oh,
day.
Then I can do it.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Marnie, you said you are going to do it?
Well, I said I can do it.
Okay.
I'll let you. Oh, that's also the day of our town hall.
No, the next day.
Wait, oh, I'm sorry. I flipped. My phone flipped. I'm sorry.
Sorry. I know.
Okay, but you'll do one more after that.
With Senator Wellman, yeah.
Yeah. You know when that is yet?
I haven't scheduled it.
Oh.
So do you have days of the week and times of the day that are better? Because then we can look at that Heather's calendar and base it off of that and then offer those dates and times to Senator Wellman to make sure we're inclusive of you. So at the end of tonight, why don't we talk about that?
Okay, there you go. And you'll be all set. All right, thank you. All right, that finishes up legislative and now a school calendar survey results discussion. And after we hear the survey results and have a discussion, we'll open it up to public comment.
Great. This is going to be a brief presentation and really just setting up the discussion point for the board to be able to engage. And Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, Donna Hood, and Executive Director of Communications, Leisha Engels, will be presenting.
Do we have the PowerPoint? Sorry, I don't have any good jokes while we're waiting for the PowerPoint. So everyone's just getting some processing time instead.
Gives us a mental break.
Yes, that's healthy.
It does. Sometimes that's nice.
Oh, yeah. I think we got it. It's kind of small. Please don't make it bigger.
There we go. It's getting there.
Oh, come on. Very long day.
All right, so like Superintendent Talia shared, Donna and I are going to go over the survey results. So on to slide number 2. Sharing an overview of the survey data. The purpose of the survey was to gather community input on the school district calendar. The majority of the participants that responded and took the survey were parents and guardians, with over 1,500 parents and guardians taking the survey, some certificated classified staff and community members as well. Do note that they're not mutually exclusive. So we allowed people to check off if they were both a parent and a guardian as well as a staff member so that we would know who was responding to the survey. The survey was requested by the board on September 22nd and it opened on the 26th, which was a Monday, and it stayed open till the following Thursday, October 6th. And there were a total of 7 questions asked. So executive summary on some of the clear preferences from the data. Number 1, keep winter and spring breaks as is. The runner-up, if any of the breaks were potentially to get shortened, would be to shorten up the second winter break in February. Another clear preference was that school should conclude before Juneteenth. And another clear one was that build one weather makeup day into the school calendar in March. Something that didn't become conclusive because of the data was the preference when summer break ends or school resumes. It was slightly favored to resume before Labor Day, but it wasn't real strong data correlating that way. The data that was probably that you could kind of, depending on how you look at it, so we thought it might be a discussion point, was on the Thanksgiving break, where 38% said keep Thanksgiving break as is. 25% said add Thanksgiving to winter, or sorry, add Wednesday to Thanksgiving break, and 33% favor adding Wednesday. However, it was not a top priority for them. So Donna's going to start going through some of the questions individually and kind of explaining some of the results that we got as a result of the survey.
Thank you. So question 1, as you can see here, was a rank order question. And the clear largest portion of our community did not want us to alter the breaks. And you'll see there in the data, if we were to shorten one, the one, as Leisha had mentioned, that would be preferred is February would be the one to consider shortening. Question 2, this is the one that was not obviously as clear or clean a data point. Those wanting to end the school year a little earlier in June just nosed out those who chose a later end. A different question, though, later in the survey kind of helped us clear up this point a little bit. You'll see that one in just a second. And interestingly, about 14% of our families did not have a preference on this particular question. Then question 3, you will see this question, of course, like the whole survey was written before we sat down to create additional calendars, and respondents chose all the answers. So it was quite a distribution there. You will note one trend that we were able to identify was that those answers that start before Labor Day roughly total to about 45% of the responses, and those representing an after Labor Day start are about 41%. So a small difference, and a substantial 20% did not have a preference.
Then back to question 4 on Wednesday as part of the break. With that one, again, we saw that keep Thanksgiving break as is was at 38%, 25% adding Wednesday to Thanksgiving break, and 33% favoring adding Wednesday. However, it was not a top priority for them.
And this next question is about our newest holiday, Juneteenth. And it really did help inform our read of some of the other data. So this one, we had a very clear 62% saying, yes, please, close the school year before Juneteenth. And this became an important date to place early in our calendar building process. Question 6, also really clear data point here with, I believe 82, pardon me, my font size is really small over here, 82% saying, yes, please keep that inclement weather makeup day in March. That was also very, very helpful. So typically from survey responses like this, the process to build calendars starts by sort of laying the end date and some of the other clear decision points first. So laying down that June 19th or earlier, and in this case earlier, right before Juneteenth, end date, keeping the March weather day, keeping all the breaks the same length, keeping the 2 professional development dates that are non-student days, but are work days, because those are in our contract, and then answering the question about whether or not that Wednesday before Thanksgiving was sustainable. That was how we approached the building of these. And of course, overarching all of it is 180 days are required to actually hold school. And then lastly, we laid the start date. So we sort of worked our way backwards from the clearest data points that we had.
All right. Questions, discussions about the survey data? Director Mullings? Yep.
I mean, I guess comments. The good news is at least 2 of the questions that we've asked before got more clear. So when to end the year or the latest, and then the snow day. So I think that's at least helpful to take those off the board. And then I think we've reestablished the preference around the current break structure. You know, almost all of them should stay intact, with some, maybe if we had to do something, it would be winter. So I guess I think it's a good to at least get that level of clarity in the system.
Yes, there was great coalescence around ending before Juneteenth, which is super helpful because then it does anchor your end and you work backwards, adding the other days. It did seem that everybody wants to keep all the breaks, although it was that February one where if there were to be any reductions, it would be around that one versus the December break and the April break. Director Weaver?
It's a little bit hard because we didn't ask, forcing questions. If
Yeah.
you could only do one, would you do this or do that? The way I kind of read it was, it seemed like there was a greater percentage of people who said, just keep the breaks as they are, than there was a really strong preference to start before Labor Day or after Labor Day. I felt like that one was pretty split. Whereas, yeah, they did say, if you made me, I would shorten February break, but I didn't really have the sense that they wanted to shorten any
Right.
breaks. And I agree that Juneteenth is absolutely the forcing function. So if we want to be sure that we end before Juneteenth, that pretty much tells us our start date. And the wild card out there, which I don't have a sense of what people want, is the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Because that one also seemed, it wasn't even, it was split. It was like 30% said yes, 30% said no, and 30% were like, yeah, whatever. Maybe do it, but it's not my first priority. So again, when they answer like that, what is your first priority? Is it to start after Labor Day? Is it to end before Juneteenth? Is it to shorten the break? I have no idea. So for me, that's the wild card. Otherwise, it seems pretty clear to me, end before Juneteenth and start school whenever you need to start school to make that happen without messing with our breaks.
Well, first of all, thank you for doing this work. And Donna, thank you for all the work you do in fostering such a collaborative relationship with all of our bargaining units, but particularly IEA. So it's no easy task. So thank you. I would say that when you disaggregate the data between the parents / guardians and the teachers, you see a pretty clear distinction on the preference for starting school. So it's mixed until you split it up. And when you disaggregate the data, you see there's a very strong preference to start after Labor Day for our parents and guardians, and a very strong preference to start before Labor Day for our teachers and getting out earlier in June. So other than that one, there wasn't, I would say, a really strong variance between the answers. I think for me, our staff and community would probably like to have consistency in the calendars. And so if you're able to start after Labor Day and end before Juneteenth, but then you on a given year, but then you can't because you add that Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I think that neither staff nor families would really like that choice. And I understand why you couldn't like mock up, here's 12 different calendars, pick one you like the most. And so that wouldn't have been untenable. But I think faced with the decision of if adding the Wednesday before Thanksgiving means that I start before Labor Day when I could have started after Labor Day and still ended before Juneteenth, I think that's a really, really important consideration. I will say that I fought really hard for that snow day, you may recall, in that room, really hard, and went back to bargaining for that. But again, it wasn't about me or for me. I clearly was carrying forward the feeling of the community. And that was something clearly that came through the survey. So I know that there will be years that we'll have an epic snowstorm and it will push us past Juneteenth no matter what we do. And we have to accept that that's it. And in this year in particular, right, we're having that weird Tuesday end to our school year because Juneteenth is on a Monday, right? Is that how that's the school year?
It is.
So we know we're living it. And because of that, I think that's why I suspect the Juneteenth one was so prominent in the survey. Had we done the survey last year, people would have probably been like, I don't care. So I want to make sure that we interpret this in the context of like, it's our calendar this year. Just like we did the calendar survey, what triggered this was we had 2 years in a row where we had less than 2 full weeks off at Christmas break. And we heard a lot of feedback because I know those are my first couple years on the board. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. With a preschooler where I don't really care about the school calendar. Now as a secondary parent, I see why the school calendar has so much impact to our lives. So I would argue again that we have consistency across years and that if we can meet the targets of what has been requested, then we should do that. And all stakeholders should know that if Wednesday before Thanksgiving prevents us from meeting those targets, that should be highlighted.
Director Weaver?
And the only thing I'm going to question a little bit is when I look at the parent survey and there's 3 options to start before Labor Day, and those add up to 40%. And there's 2 options to start after Labor Day, those add up to 48%. So I'm not sure, it's a preference for sure, but it's not an overwhelming clear preference. And then there's 13% who don't care.
Are you on question 2?
I am on question 3. When do you prefer for the school year to begin?
It's question 2.
All right, wait a minute. No, question 2 is summer break. Why?
It's just the lumping of starting school earlier, getting out earlier, or starting later and getting out later.
Right, but question 2 is the one that's asking about like your summer.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, now that's interesting then, because
I
if you
know.
look at question 3 about what day do you want to start,
They
it's
don't-
not consistent. So the answers to those 2 questions aren't consistent with each other.
Because they're not picking the days before Labor Day.
Okay, so I take your point. Yeah, I take your point on that one. Start school later after Labor Day and get out later in June. Okay.
And it's very clear with our teachers that they actually want to start before Labor Day and get out earlier.
Yeah.
So, and I think because there's the educational impact that is our job. And I get that we want to make sure that our students have the most educational days they can before testing.
So starting earlier, but everybody wants to end before Juneteenth.
Yeah. Well, as I say, now I'm just confused because people weren't consistent with their answers to question 2 and question 3. So,
But if it only asks you to check one, you're not going to have that consistency necessarily. If you have to make the choice in question 2 between those 3 choices, but then on question 3, when you have to pick one of the 6 choices, you're not going to get a normalization that you would expect.
but again, also
If
they
you
say
add up-
later in June, but if later in June is after Juneteenth, they're going to change their answer. So
Right,
I
because
don't know.
they don't,
It's-
right, they don't know what later in June means.
It's frustrating.
Yeah,
I'll just
it's
say that.
it's not entirely
I would bet the average person is also not adding these up.
Right.
And not realizing that if you choose one thing on one question and choose the opposite, according to Director Weaver on the other, that we don't get to 180.
Right. Well,
And there's no forcing function to make them pick.
Right.
right. Because the idea of I want to start after Labor Day and no, I want to start before Labor Day and get out earlier. No, I guess that does work with Juneteenth.
That one does.
Yeah, that one
Yes.
does.
If we could do 160 days, right, this would be very easy.
Right. But we don't want to do that either.
Correct.
I just want all stakeholders to know that we put so much, probably too much, focus on the calendar and a lot to try and check lots of as many boxes as we possibly can. And so it isn't just willy-nilly we throw out a calendar. Oh, there it is, as far as that. So we are super thoughtful about that. As frustrated as any group may be by the time the calendars are finally approved and
Mhm.
published.
But I did think it was interesting when we did see them, separated as far as the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Or let me see. So for the staff, a third, they were a third, meaning a third said leave it the way it is. A third said add Wednesday to the break, and a third said what?
Yeah, it wasn't convincing from the staff
No,
standpoint even. about adding-
take Wednesday off, but it's not a top priority. So it wasn't overwhelming from the staff. But they did have, yeah, I mean, it depends on where you put the people that say, oh, let's take the Wednesday off, but it's not a top priority. Do they go in the bucket of, well, let's have the Wednesday break before Thanksgiving, or let's not? So it just depends on which way you throw those
Are they
people.
in the bucket of start before Labor Day or after Labor
Right.
Day is really the question, and we don't know.
I think what we can tell from those is not a compelling argument for or against versus like the makeup day and any before
Right.
Juneteenth.
Those
Those
are the
ones are
winners.
clear. We've gotten clear marching
Yeah,
orders.
Those are super
Right.
clear.
We better do those.
Right. Okay.
But that for me, like doing something as big of a change as that, without clear marching orders and mandate for that seems
Mhm.
questionable.
And I think that's where it started. All right, is there any public comment on the calendar, either from the room or in the Zoom? Nobody out in Zoom? Anybody in the room? Okay, no public comment on this. Oh, I'm not looking at who's out there. Okay, so we leave it sort of back to all of you. In the bargaining with the IEAs per the collective bargaining agreement. And then this will ultimately come back for another round as we strive to find a calendar that meets the needs of as many people as possible. I will never say everyone because it won't, but to get out and put out the next 3 school years so people have some certainty. Because I think of all things, people would simply like to know when school starts and ends and where the holidays are for the next few years and have that set so that they know and they can plan around. Okay, leave it at that. Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
all right. Announcements and correspondence. Does anybody have any they need to announce or that haven't been sent over? Okay, good on that. And then we're on to calendar and future agenda topics. So as a reminder, of course, you all know we have the town hall on November 2nd at Maywood Middle School Library at 7 p.m. I want to say thank you to Director Weaver and Director Mullings for making a shout out video about our town hall and inviting the community to come and join us. And even though it's at Maywood Middle School, it's for anybody anywhere in the district. That's just simply where we're housing it this particular time. So feel free to come. Unfortunately, I have an unexpected family obligation and I won't myself be able to be there that night. But I will entrust it all to our handy dandy immediate past president. And I know she'll be supported by the rest of the board to carry on the town hall. So that one's set. And then we are working on creating some retreat dates. So I'm going to throw out 2 dates. And actually, I already happened to ask Director Weaver and Gallinger about these 2. So I'm now talking to the other 2 on Monday, February 6th and Friday, February 10th. there any chance those 2 dates work? And if those 2 don't work, then we're gonna just start over with a doodle type thing. Well, we'd love to have 2. But we could also, if we can't handle 2 in the same week, we could look for other dates. Did you have something, Dr. Gallagher?
I said I didn't realize that you were wanting 2 that day. I gave you
No,
both dates.
I
but
know.
was
Well, that-
assuming,
we
like
do
Sydney,
want
it was you're gonna
to-
choose one of them.
We do ultimately want to. I was really hoping to get 1 in January and 1 in February, but I didn't seem to make it in January. So I'll even take the 1 and we'll go from there.
It'd be great if we could maybe just do 1.5. Like if we could find one of our SIP days and turn that into a
We
half day
could.
plus SIP.
Yeah, the challenge is we wouldn't be able to do that until, we could use March 1st as the first one we could manage that on. The
Right.
February 15th one won't work.
Right. But I mean,
Yeah.
just that might
Right,
be.
as another option. So first, just let me know about those 2 days.
So my preference would be for the Monday because I have a staff meeting on Fridays, but that can be moved, but it's.
Let's see what.
And my preference is gonna be the Friday.
Okay,
For Friday the 10th.
10th, February 10th.
Yes, that one is much better than the Monday.
Director Maraldo, do you think you can swing it?
Yeah, I can. We're doing a big event on that next Thursday, and so it's a bad date. So I'll have to see if I can reschedule. my
Okay,
staff meeting.
let's set it and everybody put it on your calendar for Friday, February 10th. And let's give Director Maraldo a chance to see if she can make that work. And the other one then to ask you about off the cuff would be the March 1st. We have, is that it, right?
Yes.
Yeah, March 1st is a SIP and we have the afternoon.
And so you extend the full day?
It would an option would be the full day. We'd start in the morning and then go into the SIP after.
That works for me, March 1st.
Does that work for the others? Well, you're supposed to pay attention. You're getting there. So we're looking at March 1st, turning it into a whole day. So morning retreat, afternoon SIP.
I'm getting back.
I know.
The afternoon before. So I don't know if you feed me lots of caffeine. at
I
my
promise
work.
to bring it. Works for me. It worked for,
So you're talking about like
can do
9 to
that.
noon?
Should we do
Yeah.
an 8 or?
say it again?
I was gonna say, should we do an 8 a.m. start for that one to get
We
4
could.
hours out of it? No? Okay, so we'll stick
That'll
with
still hurt.
9.
No,
Okay.
I think we,
You know what? Just, I will be jet lagged. Make it work.
okay, so it'd be like from 8 to noon. March 1st.
Because doesn't our SIP start at
Killing me.
12?
Our SIP starts at 12:30.
Yeah.
We'd get lunch in there before, because we're
Right.
going
Yeah.
straight through.
Right.
Does that work for Dr. Gallagher? And, okay, let's grab that. So now we're holding 2 things that would give us at least a day and a half, and then we'll go from there. Okay, we don't need to calendar them yet. She said, I already saw Diane sent out a hold. So we'll hold those and yeah, I know, we have to be bold on this. All right, unless there's anything else. Yeah.
Wanted to talk about the December board meeting start time.
Yes,
yes.
so I didn't get to come back to you to talk about that. We were talking about moving the official start time of the December board meeting to 7 p.m. Director Mullings has been invited to attend the Black Elected Leaders Commission of Washington. I don't have the words in front of me. And they're
Yes.
having a virtual meeting, their first one, from 6 to 8 that night. And so one thinking was to let her have the 6 to 7 hour and then start our board meeting at 7. The only thing I'll say is there's the possibility we'll need to have an exec session and we'd still use our 5 to 6 time. My first preference would be literally we just start at 7. But I'm just worried that there may be the need for something at that one.
Would that work? Could you do exact 5 to 6, the thing from 6 to 7 and then
Yeah.
our meeting from 7?
I can, but I know that's
It's an ask because it creates a hole.
It creates a hole
for
for everybody
us.
else.
It creates a hole for the rest of us, but It would be my preference that we not have to do something in that earlier hour.
It's a virtual, is that what this
Right,
is?
yeah.
It's virtual, so I would
Okay,
do it
so
in
you
the
can-
building.
yeah.
She'd be
I would
in the
come here and
building.
do it.
I just want to make sure, yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we'd be.
I'm
you
not
know,
sure I'm even gonna be at that meeting.
So you're not, you may not be there.
I mean,
Okay,
just FYI.
okay.
And so if there's, I will
So-
need to know with a lot of lead time, if there's an executive session that I need to be at.
Right,
Because
okay.
I will have to zoom
Yeah, I
in.
think it's gonna be hard to know until we get.
I know, but just, I mean, as far as you know,
Once we know.
let me know, and that way it would be
So-
preferable that you keep that at 5. Because
Yeah,
I would,
Because you could do the 5.
I could do the 5
Okay.
and Zoom,
Oh,
but
Okay.
but-
So that
but-
works for you.
yeah, as I get later into the night.
So I don't think we need to officially calendar this yet because we have the November 10th meeting, but I'd
Okay.
like to give Sydney the go,
Yeah,
the thumbs up.
because I think it would be good for her to
Right.
do that.
So thumbs up on you can be there in your virtual meeting from
Okay.
6 to 7, but keep everybody's still keeping the 5 o'clock start, on the books and we'll go from there. Okay? All right, then that works and we'll do the official calendaring at the next one for you. Okay.
Great.
All right, thanks, everybody. Then we'll adjourn our meeting.